It was the year 2541, and humanity had long since reached the stars. What was once an ambitious dream had become an ordinary reality. Space stations orbiting distant moons, human colonies scattered across countless planets, and interstellar trade routes buzzing with life. Yet, for all the achievements, humans had never truly encountered anything beyond their own kind. Sure, there had been rumors of strange signals, bizarre phenomena in the far reaches of the galaxy, but no evidence of intelligent life had ever emerged. That was about to change. It began with a hum, so faint at first that it could have been mistaken for a glitch in the ship's systems. But then it grew, louder and sharper, like a pulse echoing through the very fabric of space. A starship, larger than any human craft, appeared without warning in Earth's orbit. Its metallic surface shimmered with an otherworldly iridescence, as if it was made from a substance that defied all known laws of physics. The ship did not belong to any known species, and its presence shook the foundations of everything humanity had ever believed. The Convergers had arrived. No one had seen them before, and no one had the faintest idea where they came from. They didn't speak like humans did. They didn't even communicate in a way that humans could immediately understand. Their language was nothing more than a complex series of signals, pulses of energy, light, and sound that transcended conventional communication. But one thing was undeniable. The Convergers were not here to observe. They were here to test. They began their experiment in the most subtle way imaginable. Entire cities on Earth went silent, as though the entire planet had been plunged into a collective state of suspended animation. People woke up in their homes, but they couldn't remember how they'd gotten there, or why they felt like they were being watched. A strange unease spread, a whisper of something bigger than anyone could comprehend. For weeks, the Convergers did nothing but observe. They didn't show themselves, didn't make any direct contact, but their presence was undeniable. Every action humans took, every decision they made, was monitored. Their technological progress, their social structures, their political systems, all were scrutinized, as if to gauge how humanity would react to the pressures of the unknown. And then, as suddenly as they had come, the Convergers took their first step in their grand design. A single human, a young woman named Elena Kavanaugh, found herself inexplicably chosen. She had no idea why or how, but one moment, she was sitting at her desk in her office on a space station near Mars, and the next, she was standing in a vast, alien chamber, surrounded by beings that defied explanation. Elena wasn't alone. Others stood beside her, faces filled with confusion and fear, each chosen from different corners of the galaxy. There were beings from distant star systems, strange and beautiful creatures of unimaginable variety. Some humanoid, others insectoid, some resembling creatures from Earth's past. Each had been plucked from their respective worlds, each from a different stage of their evolution. But despite their differences, there was one thing they all shared: a sudden and overwhelming sense of purpose. The Convergers spoke through their strange language, and Elena, despite not understanding a single word, could feel the meaning in her mind. It was a sensation, a deep sense of being in the presence of something vast, something far beyond human comprehension. "You are the leaders," a voice boomed in her mind, not a sound, but a presence. "You will lead these others through the tests. The trials will be many. You will face challenges that will test your will, your morality, and your very survival. How will you, and your kind, adapt? How will you choose when the stakes are higher than anything you've ever known?" The others, too, heard the voice, and they, like Elena, felt the weight of the burden thrust upon them. They were no longer individuals. They were representatives, chosen not for their strength or intelligence, but for something deeper, something intrinsic to their very beings. Elena felt a chill run through her. She had been chosen, but what did that mean? What kind of test awaited her? What was the true purpose of these Convergers? And most importantly, why her? But there was no time to ask questions. As the Convergers' presence loomed large, the trials began to unfold, and the stakes became clear. War, peace, survival, sacrifice. These were the things that would shape the future of these strange, disparate species. Elena and the others would soon learn that the convergence had only just begun. The test had only just started, and already, the first challenge was taking form. A challenge that would force them to make choices that would define not just their own futures, but the fate of entire civilizations. And as Elena looked around at the faces of the other chosen ones, she realized something that shook her to her core. She wasn't just part of a test. She was the test. The chamber where Elena and the others stood was unlike anything she had ever imagined. It was vast, stretching far beyond the limits of what seemed possible. The walls were made of a strange, translucent material that shimmered with light, but there was no discernible source of illumination. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, a low vibration that resonated through her bones. It was as if the very space around them was alive, pulsing with a force that made the world feel unreal, detached from the laws of nature. The group was composed of a bewildering array of species. Some looked similar to humans, tall, slender beings with smooth skin, eyes that gleamed with intelligence, and sharp features. Others were entirely alien, their forms alien to any human conception of life. There was a creature that resembled a floating jellyfish, its translucent body pulsating in the dim light, surrounded by a field of energy that crackled like static. Another was an insectoid being, its carapace shining like polished obsidian, its multifaceted eyes flicking around with hyper-alert intensity. And yet another, one of the most striking, was a being made of shifting tendrils, constantly morphing in form, as if its very body was a fluid extension of the cosmic energy that surrounded them. Elena felt a chill when she realized it had no face, no discernible features to connect with. It was an enigma, a creature beyond comprehension, its thoughts utterly alien. As Elena took in the sight of the other beings, she realized that each of them carried their own sense of unease. Despite their differences, they were all united by one thing. They were just as confused and frightened as she was. None of them understood what had just happened, why they had been chosen, or what the Convergers wanted from them. The silence in the chamber was deafening. None of the other beings made any move to speak, as though waiting for the next step in this strange process. Elena's mind raced. She could feel their eyes on her, even the ones who didn't have eyes. There was a sense of expectation in the air, thick and suffocating. And then, without warning, a voice filled the chamber, not a physical sound, but something that resonated directly in her mind. It was the same deep presence she had felt earlier, but now, it was clearer, sharper. "You are here because you were chosen," the voice said, its tone neither kind nor harsh, but carrying the weight of something far more ancient. "Your species, your kind, are in a position of great potential. Your decisions, your leadership, will determine the outcomes of the tests. You will be forced to choose paths that will challenge not just your survival, but your very essence." The other beings stirred, shifting uncomfortably. Elena could feel their fear growing. She wasn't alone in feeling the pressure. "But do not think you are alone," the voice continued, echoing through the minds of the group. "You will be guided by one another, though trust will be your greatest enemy and your greatest ally. You will face your differences, and you will see how your species handle the weight of leadership. One of you must unite them all. One of you must bear the mantle of command." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Unite them? Led them? She hadn't even led a team before. How could she be the one to guide this motley group of beings? The voice seemed to sense her confusion, and there was a moment of strange clarity, as if the presence was trying to calm her thoughts. "You are not chosen because you are the strongest, or the smartest. You are chosen because you have something within you that others do not. You have the capacity to see beyond differences, to understand others in ways that no one else can." The pressure was mounting. Elena didn't know what the voice meant by this. Did it mean her compassion? Her understanding of people? Or was there something more? Something hidden deep within her that she wasn't aware of? Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet shifted, and a soft hum vibrated through the chamber. A holographic map materialized before them, glowing in the air with an almost terrifying precision. It was a star map, but it was not one that Elena recognized. Stars that should have been millions of light years away appeared within arm's reach, and entire systems were blinking like data points on a screen. Your first task is simple, the voice continued. Growing darker now, the very air around them thickening. You must navigate this galaxy together, but beware, the path will not be kind. You will encounter dangers, other species will challenge you, and ultimately, you will face an enemy unlike anything you have known. Elena's eyes scanned the star map, taking in the swirling constellations, the paths marked by bright, glowing lines that seemed to shift and change with each passing moment. She could feel the weight of it, the responsibility of leading these beings across the galaxy, of keeping them alive as they traversed hostile worlds and faced unknown threats. But be warned, the voice intoned, the greatest threat of all will not be the ones you will fight, but the ones you will become. The tests will reveal truths you are not ready for, and not all of you will survive. The tension in the room escalated. A sharp silence hung in the air as the holographic map began to pulse with red light, highlighting certain planets in the system. A new mission, a new trial. This is your first trial, the voice said. Your mission is to make your way to the planet Rital, a world where peace once reigned, but now war threatens to destroy everything. You will need to unite the fractured species of this world, to make them work together, or face total destruction. Elena swallowed hard. Rital, a world on the brink of war. How was she supposed to unite species that had been at odds for centuries, let alone beings from entirely different galaxies? She wasn't sure if she could do it, but she had no choice. The stakes were too high. One of the other beings, the insectoid creature, spoke. Its voice was low, a series of clicks and hisses that somehow conveyed the weight of its words. This mission is impossible. They will never listen to us. The species there are set in their ways, and there is too much hatred between them. Another voice, this one from the shifting tendril creature, chimed in. It spoke in a series of undulating tones, but its meaning was clear. We have no choice but to try. If we fail, we will all die. Elena took a deep breath. The others were right. The path ahead seemed impossible, but if they didn't try, they wouldn't survive. She turned to face the group, gathering her thoughts, and, for the first time, she spoke. We'll do it, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. We have to. We'll find a way. The challenge had begun, and as the voice of the Convergers faded, leaving them with nothing but the glowing map and their resolve, Elena realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together, or they would all perish trying. And somehow, deep inside her, she knew that the Convergers were watching, waiting to see just how far they would go, and how far they were willing to fall. The journey to Rital was both swift and nerve-wracking. The Convergers had provided them with a ship, one capable of traversing vast distances in mere hours, faster than any human or alien technology could achieve. The craft, sleek and silent, was a marvel. Its surface rippled with energy that seemed to bend and twist with the currents of space itself. It was a reminder, if one was needed, that the Convergers were far beyond anything humanity, or any of the species aboard the ship, could ever hope to understand. Elena stood at the front of the vessel, staring at the holographic display that projected the world of Rital. The planet appeared serene, at first glance, its oceans sparkling with a deep blue hue, continents of green and brown stretching beneath a pale, cloud-covered sky. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. The peace that had once existed here was long gone. She could feel it in her bones. Beside her stood the others, the creatures who had been chosen with her to lead this ragtag group of species through the trials of the Convergers. There was Tarax, the insectoid, his exoskeleton clicking softly as he shifted nervously. His mandibles twitched every so often, a sign of his unease. Then there was T. Lauren, the shifting tendril creature, whose form was constantly in flux. Sometimes it looked like it had hundreds of limbs, other times only a handful, but it was always moving. It was hard to determine if it was truly looking at her or if it was simply a reflection of the constant change within it. And then there was Zara, a humanoid from a far-off system where the atmosphere was thick with acid rain and poisonous gases. She had skin that shimmered in hues of silver and violet, and her eyes, two orbs of pure light, seemed to flicker with wisdom far beyond her years. "We've arrived," Elena said, breaking the silence. She didn't feel ready. No one did. The planet's surface was now visible in its full glory. But it wasn't the peaceful world it seemed from space. On closer inspection, Elena noticed the scars across the planet's surface. Burn marks from long, drawn-out wars. Massive, sprawling cities appeared to be in ruins, their once proud structures broken, half-destroyed, or abandoned. Smoke rose from the craters, and there were no signs of life in the places that once held bustling populations. It was a world on the edge of collapse, a fragile peace that had been shattered by internal strife. "We have to land near the central city," Elena said, her voice resolute. "That's where the conflict is the worst. If we're going to have any chance of uniting these people, we need to find the leaders." The crew nodded, though each of them had their own thoughts on what lay ahead. Tarax was the first to speak. "Leaders? Which leaders?" His voice was tinged with skepticism. "There are no true leaders left. The species here have been at war for decades. They've destroyed their own power structures." Elena grimaced. She hadn't known the situation was so dire. "Then we'll have to create new ones." The ship descended into the atmosphere, its engines humming softly as they cut through the planet's thick clouds. As they neared the surface, Elena could see groups of soldiers moving across the barren land, their weapons slung over their shoulders. There were different factions, each with their own flag or insignia, their faces hardened with distrust. The Convergers had told them that their task was to unite these species. But how could they? The history of Rital was one of conflict. Its species, once peaceful, had begun to turn on one another when resources became scarce, when fear took hold, and when old wounds reopened. Now, each faction saw the others as an enemy to be destroyed, not as allies to be trusted. The ship touched down gently in a desolate wasteland outside the ruined city of Rital's capital. The silence that followed their landing was deafening, broken only by the occasional gust of wind carrying dust and debris across the cracked earth. Elena and the others stepped out onto the surface, the alien sky above them threatening rain, the air thick and oppressive. "This is where it begins," Elena said, her voice firm but her heart pounding. She turned to face the group. "We must find the leaders of these factions, convince them to meet, and get them to listen to one another. We'll use whatever influence we can to broker a peace." Taloran's voice rippled through the air, its shifting form making its thoughts seem distant yet present. "Peace? A fragile thing. If we seek it here, we risk destroying everything. Perhaps war is the only way forward. The test is to see how far we will go." The Convergers watch. Elena shivered at the thought. She had no idea what the Convergers wanted, or what kind of test this was. But the stakes had never been higher. "We won't let it come to that," she said, though even she wasn't sure she believed the words. Zara, her eyes glowing with an inner light, spoke up in a voice that was both soft and commanding. "The Convergers are testing us not only to unite these species, but to see how we lead. To see how much we are willing to sacrifice for the greater good." Elena nodded. Zara's words had the ring of truth to them. The Convergers weren't interested in simple diplomacy. They wanted to see how far these species would bend, how much they would sacrifice in the name of unity, and perhaps more chillingly, how far they themselves were willing to go to maintain their own survival. The group set off toward the city, navigating through the ruinous remains of Rital's former glory. The streets were eerily silent, devoid of the once thriving life that had populated them. Buildings that had once been full of color and life were now dark, their windows shattered, their walls crumbling from the effects of war and neglect. As they moved deeper into the heart of the city, Elena could feel the tension building. She wasn't just leading her team through a destroyed city. She was leading them into the heart of conflict, into the very place where the Convergers had intended them to face their first true test. The city's central square loomed ahead, a once grand area now reduced to a field of debris and half-destroyed monuments. But it was also the location of Rital's most powerful factions. This is where the leaders, or what was left of them, would be found. Elena took a deep breath. They were about to meet the factions of Rital, and the path to peace, or war, would depend on what happened next. "Stay alert," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "We have one chance to make this right." They stepped into the square, and immediately, eyes turned toward them, alien eyes, filled with distrust and hostility. The factions had gathered, and the weight of their gaze was unbearable. But Elena couldn't afford to falter now. Not when the future of so many depended on it. "Let's see what they will do," she whispered to herself. "And let's see if we can survive what's coming." The test had truly begun. The central square of Rital was a battlefield, albeit one of quiet tension rather than overt violence. But even in the silence, Elena could feel the underlying currents of hostility, the barely contained rage bubbling beneath the surface. Around the square, the factions of Rital had gathered, standing apart from one another, each group eyeing the others with mistrust and suspicion. There were 5 factions in total, each representing one of Rital's primary species, each with its own culture, history, and grievances. To her right stood the Zari, tall, elegant beings with skin that shimmered in shifting shades of blue and violet, their long limbs folding gracefully as they stood with their backs straight, their eyes sharp with intelligence but hard with pride. To her left, the Vergot, squat and sturdy creatures whose gray skin seemed to blend with the stone beneath them. Their claws were sharpened to a point, and their eyes glowed with an inner fire that could scorch anything in its path. The others were just as formidable. The sleek and agile Mern with their animalistic grace, the haughty and calculating Ovrak whose scales reflected the harsh sun, and finally, the warlike and volatile Kor, whose brutal reputation for dominance had earned them a fearful place in the planet's history. They were all here, and they all knew one thing. The other factions were not to be trusted. Elena stood before them, trying to steady her nerves, trying to look confident, to seem like she had a plan. Her hands were shaking, but she clenched them into fists, willing herself to be calm. The others stood by her side. Tarax, T, Lauren, Zara. But even their alien presence didn't seem to ease the tension. "You are here," a deep voice rang out from the Zari group, its speaker stepping forward. It was Quirrell, a tall Zari leader, his luminous eyes narrowed with suspicion. "But what do you want from us? We are not fools. We know that this test you speak of is just a game, a way to make us bend to your will." Elena swallowed hard. She had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. We're not here to make you bend to anyone's will," she replied, trying to sound firm but not hostile. We're here because Rital's future is at stake. The war is our future." Quirrell interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "There is no future without war. How dare you come here, claiming to have the answers? You've seen the destruction. You've seen the way we've been forced to fight for what little we have left. Why should we listen to you?" Elena glanced at her team, but no one had a ready answer. The weight of the situation was beginning to sink in. She could feel the pressure of all the lives at stake, the potential for failure so close that she could almost taste it. Zara stepped forward, her silver skin catching the dim light. "It's true, we are not here to command you. But we do believe that peace is possible. Not in the way you think, not through empty words, but through action. Through sacrifice. We've seen what the war has done to you all. How many more of your people must die before you realize that this path is leading you nowhere?" Kiro's eyes flickered with something. A spark of doubt, perhaps. But it was fleeting, replaced by the harsh lines of anger. "Sacrifice? And who should we sacrifice? Our pride? Our way of life? We are not asking you to give up your identity," Elena said, finding a burst of courage. "We are asking you to put aside your differences, for the good of all. The war, the hate, It's destroying Rital, and if you can't see that, then you are blind." As her words echoed in the square, there was a tense silence. Some of the other faction leaders murmured among themselves. The Mern leader, a lithe and angular being named Lyra, raised her head, her golden eyes scanning the crowd. "You speak of peace," Lyra said, her voice quiet but full of venom, "but peace is not what we came for. We came to survive, to ensure that our people, our way of life, continues to exist. We have suffered, just like the others. What can you offer us that will make us believe peace is worth the price?" There was a subtle movement in the crowd. A low growl from the core, a heavy-set, brutish creature whose fists were clenched tight, as though just waiting for an excuse to strike. Their leader, Zorak, stepped forward, his voice a harsh rasp. "You speak of unity, of peace, but none of us trust the others. We know what they are capable of. The Vergot killed my people in cold blood. The Ovrak betrayed us at every turn. You think they will listen to you?" There was a collective murmur of agreement from the core, the Mern, and even the Vergot. Tensions were mounting, each faction on the brink of open conflict. Elena could feel it, the pulse of violence just beneath the surface, threatening to break free. "You're right," Elena said, her voice ringing out, cutting through the growing chaos. "You don't trust each other. And frankly, I don't blame you. But that is why we need to unite. Not just for your people's survival, but for the future of this planet. For the future of all your species. You've been fighting for so long that you've forgotten why. You've forgotten what it was like before the war. I know that peace is hard, that it will require sacrifice. But if we don't try now, everything you fought for will be for nothing." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The wind rustled through the cracked stones of the square, carrying the scent of burning debris and the weight of years of conflict. Finally, Quirrell spoke again, his voice softer now but still tinged with skepticism. "You speak of sacrifice. But how much are you willing to give?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The Convergers weren't just testing the leaders of Rital. They were testing her, too. Her ability to lead, to navigate the delicate balance between hope and fear, between peace and war. How much was she willing to sacrifice for this fragile dream of peace? The pressure was suffocating, but Elena knew, deep down, that there was no turning back now. "We are all willing to sacrifice," Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "If we want to save Rital, if we want to save your people, we all have to give something. Your pride, your old hatreds, your fears, we must let them go." Her words were a gamble, a risk. Would they believe her? Would they follow her lead? Or was this the moment the peace truly shattered? The factions stood in tense silence, the air thick with uncertainty. Elena held her breath, waiting for the first spark, the first sign of what would come next. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came a voice. It was soft, but clear. "We will listen," said Zara, her tone full of determination. "But only if you show us that your actions match your words." And so, it began. The first trial was not one of diplomacy. It was not about promises made in the safety of words. It was a trial of action. A trial of leadership. Elena wasn't sure if they could succeed, but she knew one thing. This was only the beginning. And whatever came next, they would have to face it together, or fall apart in the process. The Convergers were watching, and now, the test of unity had truly begun. The atmosphere of the central square shifted in an instant. What had started as a tense standoff quickly escalated into something more urgent. The factions had agreed to listen, yes, but only if action followed words. Elena felt the weight of their expectations pressed down on her shoulders. This was the moment. The Convergers were watching, and they wanted results. Before Elena could even formulate a plan, a booming voice echoed across the square, deep and resonant, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Your trial begins now," the voice of the Convergers intoned. It was the same voice they had heard before, a force that seemed to pervade every corner of her mind, resonating in her bones. To prove your leadership, to prove your unity, you must overcome a common enemy. An enemy that will test your strength, your resolve, and your ability to cooperate. The ground beneath them trembled, sending a ripple of unease through the group. The once barren city square began to change, rapidly. Buildings shifted and warped, rising and falling as if reshaped by some unseen hand. The once still, lifeless sky now darkened, a swirl of red clouds forming overhead, blocking out the sun. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she instinctively took a step back, but then the voice continued. You will face what you fear most, it said. The enemies you cannot defeat alone. The trial will test whether you can work together or be torn apart. The ground cracked open, and from the rift emerged creatures unlike anything Elena had ever seen. They were massive, hulking forms, their bodies made of shifting, molten rock, their eyes glowing with an inner, fiery rage. They were the Wurmash, ancient beasts from the core of Rital itself, creatures born from the planet's core, forged in the very heat that had once made the planet habitable. Now, they had awakened, driven by some primal force, eager to burn and destroy everything in their path. The Wurmash roared in unison, the sound so powerful it sent a shockwave through the square, causing the stone beneath them to crack and splinter. One of the creatures raised a massive arm, its fist glowing with molten heat, and slammed it into the ground. The impact sent a shockwave that knocked several of the factions off their feet. Elena staggered but kept her balance, adrenaline surging through her body. This was the trial. This was what the Convergers had intended. To see how the factions would respond under pressure, how they would fight for survival when the stakes were life and death. The Zari leader, Quiril, was the first to react. His eyes flashed with determination, and he barked orders to his people, his voice commanding as the Zari raised their arms, energy shields materializing around them, glowing with blue light. Protect the weak, defend our position, Quiril shouted. The Zari formed a defensive perimeter, their shields shimmering in the air as they tried to maintain a tight formation. The Vergat, no strangers to conflict, immediately began charging toward the Wurmash with their claws bared, their deep growls reverberating through the air. Forward, to battle, Zorak, the core leader, cried, his voice rough with the thrill of combat. The core surged forward, swinging their massive fists and roaring with bloodlust. The Mern, lithe and fast, darted around the periphery, their sleek bodies weaving in and out of the chaos, preparing to strike with precision. We'll find their weak points, Lyra, the Mern leader, called out, her voice sharp. Amid the frenzy, Elena stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. She had to do something. She couldn't let them all descend into chaos. This was the test. The Convergers were watching, and she needed to prove that she could lead them, could bring them together. Wait, Elena shouted, raising her voice above the noise of the battle. For a second, it felt like no one was listening. Everyone was too caught up in the chaos of the Wurmash's assault. But Elena's words seemed to break through the madness, and the factions paused, looking to her with a mixture of confusion and reluctant attention. Stop, Elena repeated, more firmly now. This isn't how we win. If we keep fighting like this, we'll destroy each other before the Wurmash even get the chance to. We need to work together, all of us. There was a tense silence before the leaders responded. Quiril narrowed his eyes but nodded slowly, the flicker of uncertainty still present but mingled with curiosity. Zorak, the core leader, grunted, still itching for a fight but seemingly willing to listen. What do you suggest, human? Quiril asked, his voice sharp but not dismissive. We can't defeat them with brute force alone, Elena said, taking a deep breath and trying to keep the panic from her voice. The Wurmash are too powerful individually, but together, if we coordinate, we can strike at their weak points, use each of our strengths to our advantage. If we plan this right, we can defeat them and survive. She turned to the other leaders. The Zari have energy shields. Use them to protect the rest of us. The Vergat are strong. They can go in and engage them directly, but they'll need cover. The Mern are fast. They can scout the Wurmash, find out their weaknesses and act as decoys. The core. You're the front line. Draw their attention. Keep them distracted while the others find a way to attack. Zara stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing. We can use the terrain to our advantage, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos. There are pillars of stone around the square. If we channel the Wurmash toward those, we might be able to trap them. Alina's heart raced as she looked to each leader in turn. There was no guarantee this would work. No certainty that they could actually pull this off. The Wurmash were ancient creatures, creatures that had once ruled the planet's core. But it was their only chance. You all have to trust me, Elena said, her voice steadying as she felt the weight of the moment. We must do this together. For a long moment, no one spoke. The Wurmash continued their advance, their molten fists smashing into the ground, sending ripples of heat through the square. Then, finally, Quirrell spoke, his voice low and reluctant but grudgingly accepting. Very well, he said. We will follow your plan. But if it fails, you will be held accountable. Elena nodded, swallowing her fear. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this responsibility, but there was no turning back now. She turned to her team and the other leaders. Let's do this, for Rital. And with that, the battle began, not as a series of individual fights, but as a unified effort. The factions moved as one, their coordinated attack a testament to their willingness to work together, if only for the sake of survival. The Wurmash, relentless and ferocious, were not easily defeated. But Elena could see the tides beginning to turn. With every strike, every coordinated attack, the Wurmash faltered. The shields held, the strikes found their mark, and, slowly, the Wurmash began to fall. The trial was far from over. The Wurmash weren't the only challenge they would face. But this was a victory. One that proved something vital to both the factions and to Elena herself. It was proof that unity, though difficult, could be achieved. And as the last of the Wurmash fell, the square fell into a tense silence. The Convergers were watching, and Elena knew one thing for certain. The stakes were only going to get higher from here. The last of the Wurmash fell to the ground with a thundering crash, their molten bodies sizzling and hissing as the energy dissipated into the air. The square, once a battleground, now lay still, at least for the moment. Smoke curled up from the bodies of the fallen beasts, and the ground was scorched and cracked, a testament to the violence that had just transpired. But despite the destruction, something had changed. The factions stood in uneasy silence, their eyes locked on the remains of the Wurmash. They had done it. They had worked together, each faction contributing their strengths and abilities, to defeat the creatures that had been unleashed upon them. It was a victory, but it was not a simple one. Elena's heart was still pounding in her chest, her breath shallow as she surveyed the square. She could hear the distant sound of the factions catching their breath, their voices murmuring to each other. The tension had not completely disappeared, but there was something new in the air, an unspoken recognition that, for the first time, they had all fought as one. Look at them, Zara said softly, her voice a mix of awe and caution. They did it. They worked together. Elena nodded, but she could feel the weight of what had just occurred. The Convergers were watching, and they had seen this moment. But she also knew that the real test had only just begun. Defeating the Wurmash was one thing, but how would the factions handle the consequences of their actions? How would they handle the sacrifices that had been made? The Vergot, still panting from the battle, were the first to break the silence. Zorak, their brutish leader, stood tall and glanced around at the other factions, his face twisted in a mixture of pride and reluctance. You have done well, he said, his voice gruff. For now, we live. But how long will this last? How long before one of us betrays the others? Elena's stomach twisted at the harshness in his words. She had known the road to peace would not be easy, but hearing Zorak voice the doubts that lingered in the air was a bitter reminder of how fragile their unity was. The core had always been a people of conquest, their honor bound to the art of war. For them, collaboration was a foreign concept, something that came at a great cost. We can only move forward, Elena said, her voice steady, though she felt the weight of Zorak's words. The question isn't how long this will last. It's whether we can hold on to it. If we give in to distrust now, everything we fought for will crumble. The Mern leader, Lyra, approached, her lithe form moving with the same grace that had made her such a formidable force in the battle. Her golden eyes locked onto Elena's, and for a moment, Elena wondered what the Mern were thinking. They had been the most reluctant to join the alliance, only taking part in the battle when they saw the advantage it would give them. It's not that simple, Lyra said, her voice low and calculating. The Wermash were a test. The real test is whether we can overcome the differences we've carried for centuries. You think this victory means peace, but it doesn't. This battle has only shown us how much we still hate each other, how much we distrust one another. Elena's chest tightened. She understood the truth in Lyra's words. Even though they had fought together, the factions had not truly united. They had simply momentarily set aside their hatred in the face of a common enemy. And now, the real work had to begin. Quirrell, the Zari leader, stepped forward, his face a mask of quiet contemplation. He glanced around at the other leaders, his eyes heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. "You're right," he said, his voice soft but filled with authority. "The Wermash are gone, but the fractures between us remain. This unity was born of necessity, not trust. And trust, that's something we've lost over generations of war. How do we rebuild it?" Elena felt a pang of guilt in her chest. She had thought that defeating the Wermash would be the end of the trial, the moment of success. But now, it was clear that the true challenge lay ahead. The factions had fought together, but that didn't mean they would stay together. The weight of the Convergers' expectations hung over her like a cloud, and she could feel the pressure building. The Convergers wanted to see them fight, yes, but now they also wanted to see if they could hold their fragile alliance together. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension, sharp and clear. "You will never unite us," Zorak sneered, his heavy boots thudding against the cracked ground as he stepped forward. "You may have defeated the Wermash, but there are bigger threats out there. And if you think we can trust each other to fight them, you are all fools." There was a collective murmur of agreement from the core faction, their eyes burning with distrust. Elena's stomach dropped. She had feared this moment. Quirrell raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "Enough, Zorak, we know the truth, but what you fail to understand is that this fight, this planet, it's bigger than our differences. It's about survival, not just for us, but for every species on Rital. And if we cannot work together, we will all fall. So, if you want to continue fighting, fine. But you fight alone." Elena was silent as she absorbed Quirrell's words. This was the moment. She could feel it, the turning point. The Convergers were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Zara's voice broke the silence, her eyes flashing with urgency. "We can argue about this all we want, but there's something more pressing. The Wermash weren't the only test. The Convergers have made it clear. They're watching us. The next trial is already here." Elena turned to look at Zara, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? What trial?" Zara nodded toward the sky, where dark clouds were swirling, gathering in a menacing formation. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. "They're testing us now. They've shown us our strength. But now, they'll show us what happens when we fail." As if on cue, the ground trembled again, and from the swirling clouds above, something enormous descended. A massive ship, larger than anything the factions had seen, appeared out of the storm. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly energy, and Elena could feel its presence like a pressure on her chest. The Converger's ship was here, and it was not alone. Hundreds of smaller vessels, each one bristling with alien technology, appeared behind it, forming a blockade in the sky. The Convergers had arrived in force. Elena's heart skipped a beat. The next trial had begun. "This is it," she whispered to herself. "The true test of unity." The factions could no longer hide behind their pride and hatred. The Convergers were not simply watching. They were forcing them to work together, to face an even greater enemy than the Wehrmacht. And now, there was no turning back. The Convergers' fleet loomed above Rital, their ships hanging like dark omens in the swirling clouds. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, the ground still warm from the remnants of the Wehrmacht battle. But this threat was unlike any they had faced before. This wasn't a creature born from Rital's core. This was something far more dangerous, something that had come from beyond the stars. Elena stood at the center of the factions, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The trial, she now realized, wasn't about defeating external enemies. It was about overcoming the internal fractures that had divided the species of Rital for so long. The Convergers had shown them a glimpse of what they could accomplish together, but that wasn't enough. They had to prove they could sustain that unity in the face of a threat far more powerful than the Wehrmacht. But the factions were on the edge. They had barely come together in the first trial, and now they were being forced into a situation where their old hatreds could erupt at any moment. Zorak's words echoed in her mind, "You will never unite us." She could feel the pressure building. Every faction's leader stood before her, their faces hard with determination or doubt. Even Kirill, the usually stoic Zari leader, was not immune to the tension. The air was thick with uncertainty. "We've come this far," Elena said, breaking the silence, her voice steady. "But if we fight each other now, we'll be destroyed. We need to stand together, now more than ever." There was no immediate response, only murmurs of agreement and suspicion. But Elena could see the flicker of resolve in some of the leaders' eyes, particularly in Kirill, who had been the most cautious, yet now seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The Zari, for all their pride and intelligence, were beginning to see that their survival hinged not on power alone, but on cooperation. A deep, rumbling sound echoed from above, a low hum that vibrated through the ground beneath them. Elena's gaze lifted to the dark sky, where the massive ship of the Convergers continued to hover, an imposing presence that threatened to swallow the planet whole. It was an unnatural, otherworldly craft, its sleek surface shifting with lights that seemed to pulse in rhythm with an unknown heartbeat. "We don't have much time," Zara said, her voice cutting through the air. "They're preparing to descend. We need to be ready. How do we fight something like this?" Zorak growled, his hands clenched into fists. "This is not a battle of strength. This is a test. They want to see if we can handle them, if we can handle the truth of what we are." "We are more than this," Elena said, the words coming from a place deep within her. "We are more than our past, more than our grudges. If we can defeat this, we can show the Convergers that we are capable of something they never thought possible. Unity." The factions were still wary, their eyes flickering toward one another. But the message had been sent. Elena could feel a shift in the air, a slow turning of the tide. She could see it in Kirill's eyes. He wasn't fully convinced, but he understood the stakes now. The ship overhead began to descend, its massive presence casting a shadow over the city. Elena's heart raced, her pulse hammering in her ears. They were out of time. Then, the Converger's voice rang out, deep and unyielding. "You have passed the first trial," it said, reverberating in their minds. "But now you will face the true test. We shall test your unity against an enemy greater than any you have known. Your survival is uncertain, but this is the only way." A series of metallic doors on the Converger's ship opened, and from within emerged strange, humanoid figures, tall and slender, their bodies covered in shimmering exoskeletons that seemed to shift with the light. Their eyes glowed with an ethereal, otherworldly light, and their movements were eerily graceful, like predators in perfect control of their domain. "These are the Ovrak," the Converger's voice continued. "They are our creations, an amalgamation of what we have learned from countless civilizations across the stars. They are as much a part of the Convergence as you are, and they are here to test your will to survive. The trial begins now." Elena's stomach dropped as the Ovrak slowly descended from the ship, their eyes scanning the factions like predators sizing up their prey. The Ovrak were no mere warriors. They were a weapon, a living, breathing symbol of the Convergers' power. The leaders of the factions stood firm, though each one could feel the tension building. The Ovrak moved in perfect synchronization, their every motion precise and calculated. They were not here to negotiate, they were here to dominate. "Stay together," Elena urged, her voice strong despite the fear creeping into her heart. "We can't afford to fight among ourselves now. We fight together, or we die apart." The factions hesitated, but then, one by one, they began to move into position. The Zari raised their shields, forming a protective perimeter. The Vergot, with their thick, muscular bodies, took up the front lines, ready to absorb the first wave of Ovrak attacks. The Mern darted into the shadows, moving with deadly speed to flank the enemy, while the core stood like a wall of flesh, growling as they prepared for the inevitable clash. Elena felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. This was it. The moment when everything would be decided. She wasn't just leading a group of people anymore. She was leading them in a battle for their future, for the survival of their species. And the Convergers were watching. If they failed here, everything would be lost. The first Ovrak lunged, their sleek forms moving with terrifying speed. They met the Vergot with a clash, the shock of impact reverberating through the square. The Vergot fought back with brutal force, their claws tearing through the Ovrak's exoskeletons. But the Ovrak were relentless. With every blow the Vergot struck, the Ovrak adapted, their bodies shifting and healing as if they were learning from every encounter. The battle was fierce, but it was clear that brute strength alone would not be enough. Elena's mind raced. The Ovrak were not just fighting. They were learning, adapting, evolving with every strike. But there was something the Convergers hadn't accounted for. The power of the faction's unity, the collective will to survive. "We can't let them learn from us," Elena muttered under her breath. Then, it came to her, the key to victory. If the Ovrak were adapting so quickly, they needed to be overwhelmed with unpredictability. They needed to fight in ways the Ovrak couldn't anticipate. "Elena," Zara's voice broke through her thoughts. "We need to act fast. They're adjusting too quickly." She turned to Zara, who was pointing toward the center of the square, where the Ovrak's leader stood, directing their movements. If they could take down the leader, perhaps they could destabilize the rest of the Ovrak forces. "Take the leader down," Elena shouted. "Distract the others. We'll go for the center." With renewed purpose, the factions shifted tactics. The Zari shields held firm as the Vergot and core surged forward, drawing the Ovrak's attention. The Mern darted around the edges of the chaos, their precision strikes targeting the Ovrak's weak points. Elena and Zara led the charge, their combined force pushing toward the Ovrak leader. It was a fight of attrition, one that would demand everything from them. But they fought as one, united in a way they had never been before. And then, with a final, decisive strike, the Ovrak leader fell. The rest of the Ovrak paused, their bodies twitching in confusion, as if their purpose had suddenly been lost. The factions pressed forward, the tide of battle shifting in their favor. As the last Ovrak fell, a silence descended over the square. The Convergers' voice once again echoed through their minds, cold and unyielding. "You have passed the trial. You have shown that you are capable of unity, but you have also demonstrated your weaknesses. You will face further tests. But for now, you have earned a brief respite." Elena stood amidst the wreckage of the battlefield, her chest heaving with exhaustion, but there was a flicker of hope in her heart. They had done it. They had survived, together. But the Convergers were not done with them yet. The trials were far from over, and the true test of unity was just beginning.